What do Jeff Tabaka, Ed Olwine, Rube Melton, and Colonel Snover have in common? Well, you've probably never heard of them, and they were all selected by the Phillies in the Rule 5 draft. Today, we're going to talk about the top 5 Rule 5 draft selections in Phillies history.
Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball History.
Don't forget to check out our merchandise. T-shirts, phone cases, masks, notebooks, mugs, and much more. Just go to tpublic.com and look for Philadelphia Baseball History. The Rule 5 draft existed in one form or another since 1892. Back in 1892, that's basically how the National League teams chose new players for their rosters. They would draft them from the minor leagues who were part of the national agreement and pay a set price for a player's contract. When the National and American Leagues made peace in 1903, they continued with the same setup as the Rule 5 draft. It was more like an entry-level draft at the time, almost like the amateur draft of today. But when teams began setting up farm systems and establishing exclusive affiliations with minor league teams, the Rule 5 draft evolved as a way to ensure that teams were not hoarding all the best players in the minor league system. That started around 1931. So from 1931 to today, the Rule 5 draft has had significant rule changes, but the purpose remains basically the same: to give teams a chance to pick minor league players from other systems that have been hanging around in the minors for a while and never really had a good chance of cracking the majors yet. The Rule 5 draft isn't always big. In 1974, for example, only 3 players were selected in total. Major league teams don't have to make any selections. And because the rules hold that you have to keep the players that you select on the major league roster for an entire year, or offer that player back to the team that you selected him from, teams aren't always willing to lock up a major league roster for an entire year on the roll of a dice. To be certain, very few Rule 5 selections have made it big. Roberto Clemente is a big example of one who did. And when it does work out, sometimes a Rule 5 selection fills a small void in the team's makeup rather nicely. So with all that in mind, here are the top 5 Rule 5 draft selections in Phillies history. 5 plus. I have 2 players that I'm going to call 5 plus, and that's because they were chosen before 1931, when the Rule 5 draft was really more of an entry-level draft, roughly equivalent to the amateur draft of today, except that the teams were picking from the minor leagues who didn't have exclusive affiliations the way we do now. The first player is Pinky Whitney. He's on another one of our top 5 lists, well, a top 4 list. It was the top 4 Phillies third basemen who weren't named Schmidt. And that's because he had a solid career as a Phillies third baseman, around the same time that Chuck Klein played for the Phillies. He was taken in the 1927 Rule 5 draft from the New Orleans Pelicans. But of course, the biggest prize from the Rule 5 draft before 1931 was Hall of Famer Grover Cleveland Alexander. The Phillies took him in the 1910 draft from the Syracuse Stars of the New York League. Now, Larry Shank makes a big deal of how the Phillies took Old Pete in the 1910 Rule 5 draft, but he's making too much of a big deal of that, and that's because, as I've said before, back then, the Rule 5 draft wasn't what it is today. In fact, it was a common method for the major league teams to pick players out of the minor leagues who were part of the national agreement. Now, teams that weren't in the national agreement, well, they could sell their players directly to any major league team and have a better control over the price. And that's why Robert Lefty Grove was able to command a high price for Jack Dunn of the Baltimore Orioles of the Eastern League, who sold Lefty to Connie Mack for $100,006. But back to our list. Number 5. Pinky May. Pinky May was a third baseman who spent 5 seasons in the majors, all with the Phillies. He was selected in 1938 from the Yankees organization. He played from 1939 through 1943. Pinky's career numbers are, well, not bad, but 2 things to keep in mind. During this time, the Phillies were really, really bad, and he played during World War II, when most of the best players were off fighting the war. So his offensive numbers may be somewhat inflated, but all things considered, he wasn't a bad outcome for a Rule 5 player. Number 4. Todd Pratt. The Phillies took Todd Pratt from Baltimore in the 1991 Rule 5 draft. He was Darren Daulton's backup from 1992 through 1994. And like it or not, a backup catcher is nothing to sneeze at. It's a valuable role because you're going to get a chance to play to spell the primary catcher. Pratt played 8 seasons with the Phillies over 2 stints, the first from 1992 through 1994. He then signed as a free agent with the Phillies again in 2001 and stayed through 2004. His offensive numbers are not fantastic, but they are solid for a backup catcher. All things considered, the Phillies got their value out of Pratt, and he performed much better than your average Rule 5 player. Number 3. Clay Dalrymple. Picked from the Milwaukee Braves organization in 1959, Dalrymple was immediately put to work by the Phils as their catcher. He played in 82 games in 1960. In 1961, he became the primary catcher and played 100 games or more from 1961 through 1967. His numbers, they aren't fabulous, but for a catcher, he had longevity, and that's important. 1962 and 1963 were fairly decent seasons for Dalrymple. He was also the Phillies catcher during the infamous 1964 collapse. Again, for a Rule 5 pickup, Clay Dalrymple gave the Phillies a lot of value. Number 2. Dave Hollins. The Phillies chose Dave Hollins from the 1989 Rule 5 draft from San Diego. He played in 72 games in 1990 with 114 at-bats. His average, however, was below the Mendoza line at 184. And this is the danger of the Rule 5 draft. Hollins could probably have used another year to develop his hitting skills in the minor leagues, but the Phillies had to keep him on the major league roster. That is, if they wanted to keep him in their organization. But his career didn't seem to suffer. Hollins had a 12-season career. 7 of those seasons were with the Phillies. In 1991, playing in 56 games, Hollins hit close to 300. In 1992, he became the starting third baseman, and Dave had some impressive numbers. That year, he also led the majors in a rather odd category, hit by pitches, with 19. I guess he rubbed the pitchers the wrong way. He was an all-star in 1993, and he had another year with 93 RBIs and 104 runs. Hollins hit .273 that year. Hollins was injured in 1994 and missed much of the season. He was traded in 1995. He returned to the Phillies in 2002 after signing as a free agent, but that was his last year as a major leaguer. Now, specifically because Hollins had 2 really good seasons before his injuries, the Phillies got their value for their Rule 5 pick, and that's why I put him at number 2. Honorable mention. Now, whether Odubel Herrera is an honorable mention or a dishonorable mention, well, that depends on your point of view. The fact is, despite his legal problems, no list of Phillies Rule 5 picks can be complete without Odubel Herrera. Picked from Texas in the 2014 Rule 5 draft, Herrera had some impressive numbers in 2015. In 2016, Herrera was the lone representative of the Phillies in the All-Star game, and he began the season again with good hitting statistics. His play was good enough to earn him a 5-year, multi-million-dollar contract extension. But even without his legal troubles, Herrera is still a polarizing figure. Herrera had his loyal supporters who pointed to his continued offensive production, but his detractors noted that Herrera was something of a streaky player. Yes, he could have months where he hit over 300, but he'd follow that up with extended slumps. Plus, he had a problem listening to his coaching. This was evident when he made frequent base running mistakes. His legal troubles probably means that Herrera will never wear a Phillies uniform again, but his long-term multi-million-dollar contract made him impossible to trade. So in 2020, Odubel Herrera did not play professional baseball at all, yet he was still paid by the Phillies. And the Phillies are required to pay him in 2021. Even if they could trade him, the Phillies would likely need to eat some of Herrera's contract, which is why I would not be too surprised if Herrera made a comeback in a Phillies uniform in 2021. Number 1. Shane Victorino. Shane Victorino has the distinction of being selected twice. In the Rule 5 draft, he was first selected by San Diego from the Dodgers in 2002, but San Diego gave him back to the Dodgers before the end of the season. Then the Phillies took Victorino in 2004. Interestingly, they offered Victorino back, but the Dodgers weren't willing to take him, and thus began his 12-season Major League career, 8 of which were with the Phillies. Twice, Victorino won the fan vote for the final pick of the All-Star game. This was an interesting gimmick from 2002 through 2018 in order to try to spur greater interest in the fans in the All-Star game, whose popularity had been waning. Victorino had 3 Gold Gloves with the Phils and 1 with Boston. His offensive numbers were pretty impressive. Victorino twice led the majors in triples and did particularly well from 2007 through 2009. Shane Victorino was a fan favorite and a big reason why the Phillies were 5 times NL East champions, 2 times National League pennant winners, and won the World Series in 2008. Given his big contributions and the length of his career with the Phillies, it's a good thing that the Dodgers didn't want him back. And he is the best Rule 5 draft selection, of the modern draft that is, in Phillies history. So, what did you think of our list? Would you have chose differently? If you want to see who we list as the top 5 second basemen in Phillies history, well, click here for that video. Check out the description box for a link to our merch store and for instructions on how you can help us continue to make these videos. Subscribe so you can continue to get notification when we publish new videos. Tell your friends about us. And thanks so much for watching.